Cool. So the purpose of what we're really looking at talking about today is in sport especially, but just in life. Whether it's coaches, whether it's parents, whether it's teachers, there's so many messages that can be sent that aren't either not necessarily being received or delivered optimally, or they're just being missed altogether. So if today we can just create a little bit more awareness, and Jason, you have worked, with tons of athletes, but how many boys do you have?
Oh, I had 200 at one time. Yeah, that was underneath me. So yeah,
Right. So tons of experience and seeing these firsthand, and then also, as a coach and as an ex-athlete yourself. So yeah, if we can really generate some great awareness for anybody that's listening, that's either a parent, a teacher, a coach, or athletes themselves growing up, getting older, that's a huge win for us today.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's a great topic, and thanks for having me on.
I'm excited to.
Perfect.
And this, I think, will be something we'll probably do more often. If we're going to try to keep this to 20 minutes today, and we could probably talk for 20 days about this, then I'm sure there's a lot of questions that will be generated. And for anybody that's listening,
that's the challenge, right? 20 minutes. So let's do it. Let's get
it going. So I was going to say, we'll go quickly into this, but for anybody listening, go ahead, post your comments below. And if we can respond to you, we will. And if we think that this is something we can do another one of these, we'll certainly host that too. So kind of 3 topics that we'll talk about today. The main one is just really simple to kind of get on the topic of what are some of the main messages that you are seeing sent, delivered, received, etc. But we'll speak sports specific. What are some of the messages that you see being sent?
Well, that's a great place to start, really, and I think that is maybe where a lot of it's missing is what it is we're trying to accomplish. Like, what is the priority of sport? To me, and I mean, I'm a high performance coach. Like, I want people to dream big and aspire big and to have big goals and big dreams, and I help people do that. But when we're talking about sport in general, I think we get lost in that high performance aspect, that everyone is on this trajectory to be something. And I think when we start worrying about the result of that sports is now a platform to get someplace, in like the physical world or some career or something, that's when we lose the opportunity to coach character. And I think that's what the priority of sport should be. And I think that's what the messaging should be, is coach the person, not the player. That's what I talk about all the time, is coaching the person and not the player. And I think when we do that, when we keep that in perspective, that becomes a relationship-based scenario. And you can't get a message unless you trust the person, believe in the person, and think that they have their best interest at heart. So for me, when I work with people, number one is building a relationship all the time. And I try and work on the level of the person and not the player.
I love that you identify person, player. And when we really dive down, and we won't have the time to talk about identity today, but really quickly, if you think player versus person is humanistic, player is sport or a part of that. It's a part of the identity. But if we speak player, we don't speak person, we lose such an ability to create that connection. And we'll save the kind of the problem areas for topic number 2, but you nailed it. Yeah, I mean, there are the purpose of the messages that are being missed. There's so many that we could be sending out, but really it's the messages that are being sent in sports, like feedback on correcting exercise or correcting a mistake that they made. But so often messages in general just seem to be coming from a negative place, right? Or
Right.
Often we hear these messages and then it becomes this negative connotation, when there could be, hey, I caught you doing something amazing. Like, that was a great play. And oh my gosh, the kid looks up to the coach and says, thank you. And could you imagine how excited he'd be for the coach's next comment? And if it's not great, it could still be received very well, just because of the rightness. So yeah,
I think the platform, or like the stage with which you set, and we talk about culture a lot with the guys that I work with, and even like the teams that I create, is, what are we about and what are you about as an individual? I think you have to set that standard first, whoever it is that you're working with. And again, that's part of the relationship, because people do have a different end game, whoever that is, right? And their investment and their commitment is going to be different with that. So if you have this baseline of like, yes, the person wants to exceed or wants to excel or wants to improve, anyone in sport will generally answer that question, that yes, they do. That's a positive, that they want to do that. Then you now have this context to provide feedback, and that's your baseline to go back from, right? So you're building that trust, and that you're not doing anything bad. This is a positive thing to help you get to where you want to go. So anytime I'm speaking with you, good, bad, or indifferent, and I'll try and definitely mix in a lot of positives there too. But when you hear something that's perceived as necessarily negative, it's actually a growth mindset opportunity to get better. And that's another thing that we talk about a lot. So just understanding that growth mindset philosophy, that this is an opportunity. And when you can understand that there are opportunities, it's received a lot better.
100%, 100%. So I think that that really covers there's a lot of messages that can be sent. Literally every communication in sport can be an opportunistic point for message, either on the individual side to receive that message, oh, what's really happening here? Or on the delivering side of, what's the real goal we're trying to accomplish here? What's the best way to deliver this message and go about it?
Right. Yeah. I love that aspect, because when you're on the same side as your client, and like I'm helping you get to where you told me you want to get to, not necessarily where I told you you're supposed to be. And then now we're doing this together, they perceive that as being a team scenario, as opposed to that traditional bridge between athlete and coach, right? There's this big divide. Like when you can narrow that bridge, do the best you can as a coach or a parent, to narrow that divide and feel like you're on the same team together. I think that does a lot for the acceptance of what the feedback is, or whatever the message is, and also the implementation of what that is.
Definitely. And I think this kind of really parlays into that second topic we wanted to talk about, is what are the biggest problems that we're seeing, or some of the common problems. I think we've kind of touched on it. So as far as like context is one of them. Giving a message. It's like if you're trying to deliver a message to the entire team, but you have two people's attention, the context and content will be offset there. So we have to understand how is this message being delivered, how is it being received, what's the purpose, what's the connection, all that stuff. And so what would you say, if we were to clarify maybe two or three of the most common problems that you're noticing, and even if it kind of connects to some of the stuff we just talked about, the first topic, what would you say are the things that come to your mind?
Well, a big word that I would say, I mean, in a parent group or in a group of coaches, if I was coaching coaches, would be, again, getting back to culture, but it's the psychological safety of the athlete. I think that is it's not forgotten, but I think it's overlooked a lot of times.
Yeah.
And I think, and again, getting back to that coach, the person, not the player, like people need to feel safe to make mistakes, right? They need to feel safe to not do something the first time they try it, right? And when you're around your peers, especially in a team sport like hockey, where if you're the only one who can't cross over to your right, or you're having a problem with this, you don't want to do it. I mean, you don't want to be the one that's standing out there looking like a newborn giraffe, right? Like it just doesn't work. But if you create a culture where it's like, this is actually like a sign of growth, this is a sign of improvement, that if you're in a scenario where you're falling or you feel uncoordinated, that this is the exact place that you're supposed to be, and that's celebrated, and so when you have a group that's celebrating that type of vulnerability, now it becomes a way easier to receive feedback too, that you're not doing something right. So for me, that's like a baseline that I really tried to drive home, that you're actually in the exact right space. You're in the sweet spot if you're not feeling comfortable.
Right.
And if everyone around you is seeing that, and there's no finger pointing, and we're embracing, we're clapping our sticks when somebody falls, or whatever the case may be, then it's a way easier environment to learn and improve.
100%. And I love that you said, the psychological safety, or the mindset, and just feeling secure that if you make a mistake, you're not going to get necessarily punished. The other side of that, and it's still a part of the message, is we want to understand there's degrees of freedom there. So if you're constantly making the same mistakes over time and you're not really learning, that's on you as the individual, whether that's a young athlete or an adult or parent, etc. And so there, yeah, we have to have that circle of safety, is what we'll call it in our business terms. Same idea, is that ability to feel vulnerable, and that vulnerability to say, I'm going to go here, and if I make a mistake, that's okay, because I know my team's got me. And then it's the opportunity. Every mistake is an opportunity to develop, as long as we see it that way.
Yeah.
And so
I mean, that distinction I think is important, because when I was talking about it, I was thinking in my head, this is a skill-based thing that I'm talking about, right? Like they're learning a new skill, or they're trying to get better at a skill. Now, if I would parlay that into me being a coach behind a bench on a hockey team, and and they keep making the same mistake, which is, let's say, turning the puck over the blue line, right, in an area that's tight for space, and now this is resulting in a transition going back the other way. And that's something that I've said again and again to that player, that is not the same thing to me, right? Like that's not the safe place to make a mistake. That's where now I need, and I think that's part of the problem too, is with coaches, we don't know how to help athletes implement what we're telling them.
Right.
So the implementation of that idea of me saying to a kid, and I'll use that same example, is you can't turn the puck over the blue line when there's a tight gap. You need to get that puck in and make the defenseman turn. I can say that 500 times, But if that athlete doesn't know how to actually take that, put it into his repertoire of like his of what he's going to do now naturally when he's on the ice, he's going to make that mistake again and again and again, right? So now for me, I think at a coach, and I think that's what's changed now in the last 20 years since I was a hockey player, is that someone would relay that information and you had to figure out how you're going to implement it, like
Right.
how you're going to make that part of your behavior pattern now. So I take it another step further. And it's like, this is how you make this part of your behavior pattern. Like after I've said this now, when you go back in line or you're sitting on the bench right now, you got to be seeing that in your head. You in that environment now dumping the puck in. You have to replay that. You have to go over that. You have to think about this before the game. And I'll give them like a list of ways to implement this idea. So when they get into the actual thick of the action, now they're able to make a different choice. Yeah. Right. So I do think that's part of it too. Like the implementation, you need to help athletes implement sometimes because they don't know how to do it.
You got it. I love it. It's the analogy we like to use, or that I've always used in the past, is when you have a client that needs certain, let's say you need certain tools, or let's say you have a human, not a client, a human being that needs to get a job done. Well, it takes certain tools to get those done. In the past, we'd say, well, do this. Well, then you have to figure out which tool to use. Is it sharp enough, or is it strong enough to use to get that job done? And then you might, use a really weak hammer to try to do the job that you're not even sure of. So our job as teachers, coaches, advisors, whatever you want to call us, as the people that have gone through it, teach them which tools to use, how to sharpen them, how to calibrate them so that they're proper, and then how to apply it. So it's like you guide them through it all, but you don't do it for them. And I think that's a big distinction that we've chatted about it before, is you're not necessarily always doing it for people, but educating, teaching how to do it, and being right there with them along the way to show them the steps if they get stuck, and or when they get stuck, but ask them to do it. And so it's the individual leading their own life at that point, so they don't feel like they need somebody to always validate that they're on the right path. That way they feel autonomous for life.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I'm all about agency, giving people agency and making that motivation intrinsic, like trying to develop that intrinsic side of whatever it is they're doing for themselves. Because at the end of the day, that we want to facilitate, like you said, provide the tools, provide the ability to implement, but the accountability then on the athlete is actually now doing that action, right? Like you want to close that gap again, so there's not so many blank, dark areas for them to have to go figure out and navigate. Yes. Right? You want to give them as much as you can, have them still be curious about the process, where they're asking questions, where they're finding value in their own curiosity, their own creativity, but then they have to be accountable to what it is that they've committed to do. And that's the other thing where I like to take it a step further and say, okay, now out of these solutions or these options that I've given you to maybe make this work, what are you going to commit to?
Yes.
What are you prepared to do? And then now they are accountable to what they told me again that they're going to do. And if they don't, then now that's on them. And now there's consequences to that. Now maybe we find a new solution, but there definitely needs to be accountability to the athlete. And I think there's kind of appropriate ways to give them that accountability.
And then what I love about that is the cross connection between, right now we're talking sport, but I have the same conversation with my employees in my business all the time. It's literally like almost the exact, so you can take sport and learn connections to life thereafter the sport. I love that. And I'll even tie back to, you mentioned when you were talking about something and I talked about it, you're like, well, I was telling myself it was more like a learned skill thing. I love that, because that's one of the problems that I see out there. And, we're not doing anything necessarily wrong. It's just we had different thoughts in our mind talking about something similar. So when you as an educator deliver a message, you have to think about what's being received on the other side. And very, very rarely is what's going on up here is going on over there at the same time. And so we have to be very cautious, like you said, to really clearly identify the thought here, clearly identify the capability to be received, and bridge that gap a little bit, then ask for clarity and understanding to make sure that it's actually understood. So a lot of times I'll say something, I'll be like, does that make good sense? And the individual will say, oh yeah, totally. And I'll say, oh yeah, show me. And that's what I get, like just blankness. They believe they got it. Once you try to demonstrate the clarity, it's not there. And that's a brain thing. Our brain works in segments. So it's like, oh, I totally got that, until it's asked to explain it. And then those segments are blurred very quickly.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, it's awesome that you asked that question. Questions are great. I think we'll probably get into that too. But, then you're now allowing them to participate. They have to use their own words. They have to use their own concepts to relay it back to you. And not only, even if they do know it, that's an awesome way for them to ingrain, to solidify those connections, right? So
and to build more confidence, build more validation, all that, give opportunities for this. And that's
Yeah.
like, okay, let's touch on topic 3, because I know we're almost at 20 minutes already.
All right.
So we've already kind of talked about some of our favorite solutions. It sounds like based on the topics here, but what's basically one of your favorite approaches to help ensure that messages are being delivered and received a little bit better? Of course, we talked about connection, we talked about community, circle of safety, all of these things, but do you have a kind of a preferred strategy, mechanism, thought process for it?
What I love about what I do is that I can't let myself off the hook. And I think that's a big one for coaches. I just think if you aren't doing what it is you're asking people to do, there's not much credibility there. So I always say to anyone that I'm talking from a coach aspect, or any of the managers that I'll deal with or whatever, is that you have to be the example. And parents too, like a big one for parents. It's like, you can't ask these kids and yell and scream and tell them to do all these things. And then, I mean, you're not showing them anything. You're not showing them in your own life how to fight through adversity or set a goal or be consistent to something that you want to become. Like if you can do that, if you can model that as a coach or as a parent, and now the kid is watching this instead of hearing it, it's much more powerful. And so that's kind of what I try and do. I try and be the example as much as I can. And the best part about being the example is that I'm going to fail a lot in front of my players, in front of my kids, and that's okay. Like that's totally okay, because that's life, right? And then now it's like, now what? Now what do we do? Now what did I do? Here's what I'm doing now. What are you going to do, right? When you fail, when you don't get it right. So that's my big one for me. The other one is ask questions, because I think if you have a beginner's mind about stuff, I try to have a beginner's mind, meaning, that everything's new. As soon as you think you got something figured out, I mean, that's the death of whatever it is you're trying to do. So I try to ask a ton of questions. And in doing that, again, I think I'm being the example. Asking questions, being curious, then enables your clients and your team or your workforce members, whatever, to be curious as well, and to always ask their own questions and stay engaged.
Demonstrating that vulnerability, right? That you're like, hey, look, like I'm going to make mistakes. Life gets tougher as you get older. It just is. And I mean, if you're getting successful, every day that you're more successful, the next day's harder, because there's new levels of stuff that you've never experienced before. And so, yeah, every day is an opportunity, and every day is a fun challenge, no matter where you are, if you look at it that way. And so, yeah, I would kind of echo a very similar thought process on like my favorite strategy. And this one is, we were made with 2 eyes, we were made with 2 ears, and with 1 mouth. And very rarely do we ever use them in that order. So if we have 1 mouth and 4 other opportunities, 2 eyes, 2 ears, we should really be listening about 75% of the time and talking 25% of the time-ish. Obviously, if you are a coach, you're going to have to dictate a bit. If you're a teacher, yes, you're going to have to. But during that process that you're talking, start listening and watching. And so often as I'm talking, even as we're talking right now, I'm paying attention and watching your body language. I'm looking for your body language and listening to it as much as I can. And if we're teachers and parents and coaches, or strength coaches, personal trainers like ourselves, like myself, when we're working with somebody, and if we can see their body language doing this, but they're not saying anything, that tells us a lot. And so often, and this may sound bad, to add context to this really quickly, I will always listen to the words that my clients say, but I often pay closer attention to their body, because it will tell me probably more than their words are. Most often when somebody's talking about something they're not confident of, they're going to leave out some stuff. But when their body shifts and they kind of pause, it's pretty clear to say, well, there's probably something missing there. My job is now to start asking more questions and digging into that. And so if we can look more and listen a lot more, we can learn a heck of a lot more about what's going on, so we can deliver significantly more ready lessons. So something that's ready to be absorbed at that point.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. That's great. I totally agree with that. Getting your client in whatever client, insert client for child, insert client for athlete, insert, whatever word you want to use there. But we can't just be talking all the time. That's the least effective way to communicate, in my opinion. So
As,
I mean,
as we're doing this talking.
Yeah, it fully is, right? There's obviously value there, 100%. There's value, but if you can combine, like you're saying, the ears, the eyes, and make it more about the client being involved in the process, as being told, right. That's you're going to be way more successful.
Absolutely. No, this is awesome stuff. We've already been 20 minutes. I know we could talk
Crazy, right?
for a super long time. Hopefully we can get that Facebook Live stuff working out so we can do this again in the future.
Right.
And, or if, if people have questions about anything we talked about or stuff we didn't talk about, go ahead, post these down below. These would be fun things for us to talk about, fun things for us to deliver messages on that can help out quite a few people. Whether it's, a youth athlete that's watching this that has some questions, an individual that's 14, 15 years old, or whether it's a parent of a younger kids, whether it's teachers at schools, whether it's coaches of organizations, whether it's general managers of organizations with coaches. Yeah, this is fun stuff to talk about. I think it's dramatically important. If we can look at ourselves, I mean, I'm 36, turning 36 right in a month. You're like what, 29ish, 30?
Yeah, give or take.
Around there somewhere. You can imagine if people in our capacity, though, thought a little bit more about this and we're a little bit more aware of it. Like, let's face it, there's a lot of coaches and trainers and teachers out there. And I've worked with a lot of them that don't really get this stuff very well. They're very great people. They're well intended, but they're missing a lot of the potential output that they could deliver. So this kind of stuff, I think, is really important for the youth to understand, but then the other side, the parents to deliver it. And then if you can imagine, if we can deliver that now, when these kids get to be a little bit older, just imagine what's going to happen with subsequent generations.
Yeah, well, I mean,
Amazing.
yeah, you're not a father yet. I'm a father of three, and that's really what got me into this realm, like more, professionally. It was just like the impact of people is incredible, right? Is absolutely incredible. So yeah, the more people we can touch, and if we can touch coaches, and if hopefully, to have better results with whatever it is they want to do, to be able to touch more people, then I mean, we can go to bed with a smile on our face, because that's a nice place to be.
You got it, man. Awesome. Well, thank you very much for your time today. This was awesome. I hope we can do this again soon.
Perfect, man. Thanks so much for having me.
All right, Jason, take care.